Chapter 33, Equilibrium Levels of Real National Output. So, chapter 27 and 31 outline theories of aggregate demand and aggregate supply, which we already talked about. Yeah, so for the equilibrium level of output, in the short run, it occurs when there's intersection of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So there's equilibrium when there's an intersection between aggregate demand and aggregate supply. That is what we mean by equilibrium level of output. Mm-hmm. Do you understand equilibrium level of output now? Okay. So yeah, the equilibrium level of output, equilibrium level of income and output is at 0y, which means, look at the graph here. Based on the graph we have, there's equilibrium. The point at which we have aggregate demand and aggregate supply. That's our equilibrium level. Is it clear?
Yes.
Okay. So they say an increase in the demand will shift the aggregate demand curve to the right. Aggregate demand is made up of consumption, investment, government spending, and exports minus imports, which is, so for aggregate, when you talk about aggregate demand, we're talking about consumption, spending, government expenditure, and net exports. So net export is export minus imports. These are what we mean by aggregate demand. Is it clear?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. We did that already. We talked about that. So they say a fall in short run aggregate supply. On the other side, a fall in short run aggregate supply will shift the SRA's curve to the left, and a variety of factors could bring about a fall in SRAS. We did that already. We talked about short run aggregate supply, wages, taxation, interest rate, exchange rate. We talked about that.
Yeah.
Nothing changes from there. So it's still the same. Please go down to equilibrium output in the long run. In the long run.
Okay.
In the long run, the impact of change is still going to be the same with the long run. But just let's view. They said, in the long run, the impact of changes in aggregate demand and supply are affected by the shape of the long run aggregate supply curve. Classical economists argue that in the long run, the aggregate supply curve is vertical. That means the long run equilibrium occurs when the long run aggregate supply curve intersects with the aggregate demand curve. So when the long run aggregate supply curve intersects with the long run aggregate demand, look at the aggregate demand here, where it intersects.
Figure 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you see it?
Yes.
So where it intersects is what we call aggregate demand. So look at the aggregate demand, then we have the long run aggregate supply. To get to the long run aggregate supply, it means you have to increase your aggregate demand. In the short run, output level falls.
Yeah.
Do you get it? Yeah. But in the long run, then there's an increase in output. Do we understand, please?
Yes.
So look at what they wrote down here. They said, okay, I said that already. There's nothing difficult here.
Let's move on.
Yeah, a rise in aggregate demand. They say, assume that there is a rise in aggregate demand in the economy, with LRAS initially remaining unchanged. For instance, there may be an increase in the wages of public sector employees, paid for by an increase in the money supply, or there may be a fall in the marginal propensity to save. And what is marginal propensity to save? MPS. What is MPS?
MPS is margin.
Change in savings divided by change in income. Marginal propensity to consume. Change in income, or marginal propensity to consume. Change in consumption over change in income.
Yeah.
So, there's nothing aggregate demand. A rise in aggregate demand, what does a rise in aggregate demand mean? It means that consumers will spend more. So if consumers spend more, what happens to the marginal propensity to save? It falls. Do you understand? They wrote it already. It said there may be a fall in the marginal propensity to save and a rise in the marginal propensity to consume. That's what happens when aggregate demand increases. Consumption increases, savings falls. When the saving ratio in an economy increases, it means people are not saving anymore. Aggregate demand will rise. Consumption will rise. Is it clear?
Yes.
Look at this graph. It said a rise in aggregate demand. For you to to meet up with the short-run aggregate supply. To exceed the short-run aggregate supply, the only thing you can do is to shift the supply, the aggregate demand curve from AD1 to AD2. You have to increase the aggregate demand curve from AD1 to AD2.
Yes.
That is when you can meet up with the economy. That means consumption will increase. Look at figure 7. Are you there?
Yes.
It said a rise in aggregate demand shown by a shift to the right in the AD curve results in a movement along the short-run aggregate supply curve. Both output and prices will increase in the long run. The short-run aggregate supply curve will shift upward with the long-run equilibrium being re-established at C. So, because at this point in time, you want to increase, whenever you increase aggregate demand, here they said a rise in aggregate demand will lead to a shift in the AD curve from AD1 to AD2. At the same time, there will be new equilibrium. The new equilibrium will be at LRAS, that means it will be at OY1, P3C. Look at it, please. OY1, P3C, P3C, or OY1, P3Y1. That will be the new equilibrium.
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying there?
Yes.
From OY1 to P3Y1. That's the new equilibrium. So P3Y1 is the new equilibrium, which is C.
Okay.
Why is it there? It's there because the short-run aggregate supply curve have moved upward towards the long-run aggregate supply. However, the economy is now in the long-run disequilibrium. The full employment level of output is OY1, shown by the position of the long-run aggregate supply curve. The economy is therefore operating at over full employment. When it is over full, that means resources are fully used.
Okay.
So, firms will find it difficult to recruit labor because there's no more employment is at the fullest. So, what will happen is firms will they find it difficult to recruit labor, buy raw materials, and find new offices or factory space. They will respond by making higher offers for wages and other costs. So it's at the fullest. At that point in time, there's no unemployment anymore. There's employment. So to attract workers, you have to attract them with higher pay. And in turn, will increase your cost. Do you get it?
Yeah.
So the economy will only return to long-run equilibrium when short-run aggregate supply are shifted upward. It has to go up from SRAS1 to SRAS2. At that point in time, the economy will balance again. Are you getting it, please?
Yes.
So the conclusion of the classical model is that increases in aggregate demand will initially increase both prices and output. The movement from A to B, when there's an increase in demand, in aggregate demand, it will increase the price level because firms will want to make the use of the opportunity of increasing revenue to increase their profits. That's why most of the time when prices increases or when demand increases, firms will raise the prices to enjoy that increase.
Okay.
Is it clear?
Yeah.
A rise in long-run aggregate supply. So here it said a rise in long-run aggregate supply means that the potential output of the economy has increased. Rising in the long-run aggregate supply that are unlikely to shift the aggregate demand curve might occur if, for instance, incentives to work increased or there was a change in technology. So, there will be a rise in the long-run aggregate supply if workers feel motivated to work or if there's advancement in technology. Because when there's advancement in technology, productivity will increase. Is it clear?
Yeah.
Increasing aggregate demand and aggregate supply. How can you increase aggregate demand and aggregate supply? You get to know through microeconomics. They said in microeconomics, factors that shift the demand curve do not shift the supply curve, as well as vice versa. The factors that shift the demand curve are different from the factors that shift the supply curve. The factors that shift the aggregate demand curve are the interest rate, the exchange rate, taxation. What else? Interest rate, exchange rate, taxation.
Taxation.
Wages.
Wages. Yeah. Wages rates.
For the supply, government policy, education and skills,
Yeah.
competition policy.
Mm-hmm.
Is it clear?
Yes.
So, to increase the aggregate demand, you have to increase those factors that would help to increase aggregate demand. To increase aggregate supply, you have to increase or improve on those factors that affect aggregate supply. That is what they are talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
Is it clear?
Yes. The factors of
To increase aggregate demand,
yeah.
you need to lower exchange rates,
Yes, lower exchange rates, wage
lower wages rates, wage
rates,
rates.
material prices. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
No, how do you lower wage rates? You increase wage rates. Firms will have much money. Consumers will have much money, then they can buy more. You lower interest rates to encourage borrowings. They can invest more. They can buy more.
Yeah.